Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. Ed, one more week down, but a week of
Mm.
full of action. How's it treating you out there?
Pretty good. Weather's crazy, but other than that, I mean, it was nice to have what do we have? Three events in 8 days or some shit like that.
Yeah, barbershops still aren't open on the East Coast, I take it?
Of course not. Look at this. I'm about to just take it all off. I'm
Nice.
trying to I'm trying to give it my scalp its last hurrah because I know I'm thinning up top or whatever. But I'm like, all right, let's let it. I want to see how I want to see pretty much how the ladies react to it once we get back to normal. Because I've been told the buzz cut's too intimidating. So I'm like, all right. So I've had a few girls say you should grow it out, you should grow it out, and I've told them you don't really want that. So here it is. It's growing. So it's growing out because we don't have a choice. So when I see chicks again, I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. And if they're like, then I'll be like, yeah, it's all going. So that's where I'll leave it.
At least you have a game plan.
Mhm.
Better than your governor out there, huh?
Bird. What the worst person who the most nervous leader ever.
Nice. Well, like you said, yeah, we had a lot of action. We managed to talk about UFC 249 last Tuesday, and then we talked about what was to come, which really kicked off on Wednesday night with the UFC, I guess Jacksonville card, the Glover Teixeira versus Anthony Smith main event. Uh, I mean, and then we jumped into Saturday night's event as well, and throughout those both of those cards, I mean, great fights. I mean, I have a hard time thinking of a week. I know that the UFC has had a past where they had, we've talked about the fight weeks where there was two, three events and stuff like that. But I really can't think of a group of events in such a short time where really every fight. I can't really think of being a disappointed about any fight. It seems like everything was violent and just everybody showed up to fight. I mean, there was some controversial decisions, which is nothing new, but for a three fight span or three
Yeah.
event span, I can't really think of anything that compares to it, to be honest.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm kind of like I'm gonna bring up the results from trying to figure out Jacksonville. Just trying to go backtrack a little here because I'm like in a blur. It was almost too many. You know what I mean? It was like almost too many events at once. But yeah, because the strange results didn't happen Wednesday. It was Saturday, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the judging calls generally were all on Saturday, but I mean, uh, really the violence and everything completely kicked off on Wednesday. I mean, actually, I'd say the violence kicked off basically with Ferguson and Gagey, and then everybody just kind of rolled right into that. I mean, the first fight alone on the Wednesday night card, Chase Sherman made his return to the UFC. He had won a few
Yeah.
fights fighting for Island Fight, one of the events that is shown on Fight Pass, and he actually had become the heavyweight champion of BKFC. I believe he was 3-0 also in their organization.
There we go.
So I mean, he came back against UFC newcomer Ike Villanueva, and I mean, just showed that he had really improved as a striker. I think due to probably a lot due to the BKFC thing, where you have to be a little bit more precise in your strikes. You got to be a little more careful. Although firefights are always fun to watch, and we like watching those brawls in the BKFC with the cuts and the knockouts and just the punishment your head can take or face can take for bare knuckle shots. You got to be a little bit more. You got to pick and choose your shots a little bit more, and I feel like he really did that. Used his kicks well and he came out with a TKO finish in the second round. I thought it was a good performance for Sherman on his return, and I mean, he's a fairly athletic heavyweight, so it's always going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Really, and then I mean, that was the first one, and then Brian Kelleher, although he missed weight, followed up with a TKO of his own in the second round, and it felt kind of like from that point on, uh, we were going to start to see. Uh, I mean, it just set the tone for an exciting night of fights.
Yeah, yeah, that the left hook that he dropped Azur with, that was definitely excuse me, that was definitely something I wasn't expecting. Usually when somebody misses weight, it's kind of in my opinion anyway, it's weird to predict how they're gonna do. You wonder if they tried so hard, are they gonna be fatigued for their fight, or were they just or maybe they didn't try that hard and they're gonna be full of pep. Whatever the case was for Kelleher, I mean the striking. I think if I'm remembering that fight right again, because it was crazy and not for nothing. For folks that didn't know, I tried to put it out on Twitter because that was the ESPN Plus event, but like immediately after it was on regular ESPN, like an hour after it was done live, you could have watched it on ESPN regular. So I recorded it and watched it the next day, so I was able to rewatch a lot of a lot of those fights. But again, I don't know, man. I mean, I know we like MMA and stuff, but it was definitely it was definitely I don't want to say overload, but I was kind of like in a blur after by Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I've been waiting for something, and then
Yeah,
the
that's
midweek.
true.
I really enjoy the midweek cards.
Yeah,
That kind of gives you something. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of action, and but it was just, it felt nice to have live sports get kicked off again. Um,
I,
I think as a jujitsu guy, you had to have enjoyed the Tiago Moises ankle lock on Michael Johnson after Michael Johnson had come out that first round looking like the Michael Johnson that has defeated the Dustin Poiriers and the Tony Fergusons of the world, and then
yeah, you
Moises.
know what's weird about that one? I saw that coming. Like it's weird the way he fell back and the way he cinched in. I was kind of like, oh, he's going for the ankle lock. And I don't know if it's because Johnson was the position he was, because you can armchair quarterback a lot of stuff when you're watching it at home. But I mean, I just feel like I have to wonder how much of a factor with the different environment. I mean, I know a lot of these guys when they're coming up in the regionals and stuff. Maybe the crowds weren't so loud or whatever. I know anyone that's been on the Ultimate Fighter doesn't mind a fanless arena or space to compete in, but I don't know. I just wonder how much. I just wonder if they'll ever, because they're all competitors and fighters. Some may admit to it, some might not. But it just makes me wonder, like, if everything going on outside of the event, how much of it was a distraction, not just for their camps, but right there that night of the fight. Because I know a lot was being made of the noises folks could hear, the shots, the corners, the commentary off to the side from the whoever was calling the fights that night. I don't know. I just feel like maybe it was just weird for him.
For Johnson or for Moises?
For Johnson, because the straight ankle lock, I mean, like I said, I mean, when it happened, I was like, he's gonna get straight ankle locked. And I don't know if it was kind of just like, oh, he's got it, I'm over this, or you know what I mean? Like, because they were kind of against the fence, if I'm remembering that right, when he fell back against it. And I don't know if he chose to try to hit him or he also fell back, because that's usually a common reaction when someone goes for a straight ankle lock and they get their legs up, they push your body. If you're getting ankle locked, I'm pushing your body away so that you can't reach up and you know fight my hands or hit me or any of that stuff. But I don't know. Again, it's he'd answer that better than anybody.
But yeah, I mean, he up until, I mean, that the submission came seconds into the second round, but the first round
Hmm.
Michael Johnson looked really good. But um, I mean, I think, yeah, you haven't seen a straight ankle lock in a long time uh,
Yeah.
in the UFC, so I guess that definitely could lead to belief that there was something else going on. The next fight was probably the surprise for both of us because I believe we both picked Felipe Lins, Andre Arlovski, although not the most exciting fight of the night. Does his thing and picks up another win over the newcomer. Disappointing fight for Lins. I think one thing we learned this, well, people won't learn it, but one thing that I've been trying to preach and usually falls on deaf ears is this whole heavyweight glass chin thing. I've never been one to fall for that. I feel like, I mean, this fight alone, Arlovski's now went to decision 9 out of his last 10 fights.
Hmm.
And then we'll get to the Saturday night main event, but we're basically talking about two guys who are considered to have glass chins, and I just feel like that's really an overblown situation when you got giants punching each other. I feel like everybody has a glass chin. If your name's not Cabbage Carrera or uh, a handful of other guys who have managed to somehow have, rock hard skulls. Basically, everybody in the heavyweight class has a glass chin. If you get caught with a punch by a 6'5", 200, 55-pound guy. So
Yeah.
I think that's been a little bit overblown with some tough runs for some of these guys during their career. Um, I don't know if it necessarily bodes well for his brains, but um, for the excitement of Arlovski's fights, 9 out of 10 to decision definitely doesn't necessarily. I can't really think of many memorable fights in that run of his, but like I said, saves his brain, picks up a win over the PFL champion who had come into the
Hmm.
UFC. I think Linz will bounce back. It probably was some of the UFC jitters um, that I believe is a real thing and has been talked about by many of the people who fight. But big win for Arlovski. Kind of keeps fending off. I kind of keep waiting for him to lose and then eventually getting cut, and that's setting up a fight with Fedor in Bellator. I've always kind of felt like that was maybe a fight that takes place in Russia and is kind of a farewell fight for both of the guys. But
Yeah, that may be, but it might be a stretch though.
it could be. I don't know if I don't, but we'll see what happens with this. You wonder where a lot of these older fighters, not so much Arlovski coming off the fight, but guys like Fedor and stuff with this delay in with the COVID thing, if some of these guys will ever really see come back. So um, big win for Arlovski though. Move up the card. Ricky Simon picked up a decision win over Ray Borg. Good close fight, split decision. I'm not really sure why it was split. If I remember, that one had some crazy scores. I feel like that might have had a 30-27 going each way, but I could be confusing that with another fight. Drew Dober continues his run, coming off a knockout win at UFC 246. He follows that up with a second knockout win as an underdog to Alexander Hernandez, a fight I don't think a lot of. I mean, obviously the gamblers didn't see it going down, but Dober moves his record. What does that say? To 25-9 now, and
Yeah, he's
20,
23-9. Yeah.
23-9, and really getting close to the rankings now after a couple good knockout wins in a row.
Yeah, I mean, it was it's one of those things where with with him especially, because I actually I forget who I picked when we talked about it. Was this one of the fights we talked about? No, I'm confusing this.
No, we pretty much
I'm,
did this to the top two. You did those picks for your other.
yeah, I know, but I'm confusing the. I'm actually confusing it with the other, or like you said about the weird judging, for the upcoming card. But yeah, no, definitely a great. I feel like this card was probably better than Saturday's card. In all honesty, um, some of these fights, like you said with the Philippe Lins and Arlovski, um, I don't know. I mean, I think it was between Wednesday and Saturday. A lot of the underdogs were winning. Um, Saturday kind of. I keep doing these horrible parlays where it's like several fights and the one messes it up for everybody else. But again, that's probably because I'm not used to this many events in a row.
Well,
But
I know. I think for the co-main and for the main event, I went 2-0, and I think you believe you went 0-2. I picked
yeah.
Rothwell to win. I thought he would do a better job, but he took a split decision for us against St. Preux. Uh, Close fight, really close fight. Could have really went either way. I would have had no problem with the judges going the other way.
Hmm.
But Rothwell sneaks out, and then really in a surprise. Although I picked Glover to win, and God, I thought I was going to hit it right because I said I said submission, choke submission in the fourth round, and he
Hmm.
was flirting with it. I mean, that whole round he was flirting with it. After coming out in the beginning, Anthony Smith had the momentum, was really putting it on Glover, and then about halfway through the second round, early in the third round, Teixeira dropped him, and from that point on, it became a beating that probably falls in the top five worst beatings in UFC history. Uh, just for nonstop barrage and
Hmm.
uh, beating that went a minute or so into the fifth round. So Smith took 2.5 rounds of just nonstop punishment from Glover. Uh, like I said, Glover
But
surprised a lot of the big
yeah.
people.
So,
Um,
but my thing was like early in the I just I mean I didn't listen to I know I forget who he spoke. He must have spoke to Helwani or somebody after the fight, but um or tweeted something, or I know he did. I'm not sure if he's done any interviews recently, Anthony Smith. But one of the things I was just kind of like I know on Twitter I was saying like, well, something happened. Like I don't know what happened that they seemed to be doing well, and then he wasn't. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if it was gas or maybe uh eh, from what I saw, I thought Teixeira was kind of doing what Rocky did to Clubber Lang when he fought him again in Rocky 3. Like he was making him work, and then it seemed like Teixeira was just kind of rolling off punches until he started firing back. And then that's when it seemed like Smith had a problem with it. And everyone knows about the teeth and all that stuff. And so I don't know. I mean, he defended his corner and all that. Herzog, I know the referee, Jason Herzog, was blaming himself for the way things went. But I mean, it's neither here nor there. I mean, I think every fight is different, every situation is different. But yeah. I mean, Teixeira has definitely reminded us, all of us, like as many fighters tend to do. Don't count them out.
Yeah, I mean, I think Smith just came out. He was throwing a lot early. I think it was a combination of somewhat gassing and then just getting hit hard. Glover's been known to be a heavy striker. He's also a real heavy grappler.
Hmm.
Maybe not maybe not the greatest submission artist of all time, but he's real heavy. When he gets on top of you, he controls his opponents uh, better than I would say a huge majority of the fighters out there. He's also able to land strikes and do submission holds um, without losing position. So once he got on top and really started raining stuff down, I mean, there was several opportunities where the fight could have been stopped, but Smith continually moved. The teeth thing is a little bit grotesque in a way. I mean, we don't want to see fighters spitting teeth out and then picking them up and
No.
heading to the raft. I mean, that's a little bit of another level. Um, Herzog taking blame for it. I I guess my issue with that, first of all, I think Jason Herzog is one of the best referees in
Yeah, he's
MMA.
good. Yeah.
In fact, if put a gun to my head, I might say he's the best. I've been saying it for a long time. Those that he's from the San Diego area, so I've been watching him do regionals. He was in did a lot of Bellator shows coming up, and then once he got into started doing a lot of the UFC events. I think, I mean, I'd easily say he's one of the top three, like I said, if not the best. Uh, I just hope that he doesn't change his refereeing style based off of the fan reaction, because the fan reaction on Twitter is always going to give you a skewed view of how things are. His job is to protect the fighters, and maybe he feels like he left it go a little farther, but let's not fool ourselves and say that if he stops that fight around earlier, that the opposite is being said on Twitter. At that point, he's
Hmm.
going to be getting everybody firing at him, saying he's a terrible ref. He stopped the fight too early. He didn't let a savage fighter like Anthony Smith have a chance for a comeback. And I mean, we're just going to hear that. So going by the Twitter reaction would be something that I would recommend that he doesn't do. I think he just needs to talk to other referees, and if they feel like there was stuff he missed, then you learn from it. But in general, I hope he continues reffing fights the way that he's done it for the last decade, and goes from there. As far as I mean, I put the onus and the blame on Smith's corner. I know he said he'd fire his cornerman for throwing in the towel and stuff, but if you care about Anthony Smith and that's your job going in there, then I would say fire me, dude. I'm not going to watch you pull your teeth out of your face. I'm not going to watch you die in the cage, because one day somebody is going to die. I mean, if we're
Yeah, we don't
being
want
straight
that.
up,
Yeah.
but it's going to happen. I
Hmm.
mean, it's going to happen. One day someone will die from a beating that they take in the cage, and then we'll have real, and I don't want it to. It has happened in other organizations. It has happened. Nothing big and or nothing in the bigger organizations. So it's kind of flown under the radar. But eventually, it's going to happen. Uh, it's just. I think it's just a matter of fact. So I think you still gotta, as a corner man. I mean, if I'm cornering you, just being my friend, and I'm seeing, nobody thought he could come back and win that fight. He's turtled up for 9, 10 minutes in a row, just taking nonstop punches and spitting out blood and telling his corner his teeth are falling out. When a dude tells you his teeth are falling out,
He handed Herzog his teeth.
I
Yeah.
know, but before they fell out, and he did that, he told his corner in between rounds that his teeth were coming out. So once he's telling you that, and he's kind of turning away when you're asking if he's okay, and I mean, you got to look into the dude's eyes and just go, man, it's just not meant to be.
Yeah, that
Uh,
should have been so. I mean, like if you're putting teeth in your pocket and the guy handed them to you, maybe that's a cue to be like, I guess we should maybe wave this one off.
and I understand the pressure put on it. I don't recall a doctor going into the cage. Maybe it's just slipped my mind, but I don't. Did a doctor ever go in there and kind of do a neurological test on the dude and kind of go, hey, how many fingers am I holding up? And
Not that I remember, but I mean, I don't know if it's you'd have to check the rules if it's the discretion of the ref to call a doctor in.
it is. You're correct about that. I don't know if you'd have to in between rounds. I think the doctor could do it, but obviously once that 1 minute ends,
Mhm.
and he needed a lot of attention from Cutman and everything else going on at that point. But I was happy to see the win for Glover. Tough guy. I'd like to see somehow him make one more run at a title shot, just because it's kind of the underdog story, and anybody that really followed his career. I mean, he was one of those guys where you saw had he was like 13 or 14-0, kind of on the worldwide circuit, and you knew he trained under Hackelman and with Liddell and stuff. So he was kind of one of those mysterious guys when he first came into the UFC that had a great record at a time when being 13 or 14-0 was a rarity. So I'd like to see it. He's up there in age. He's obviously going to get one more huge fight, and if he wins that, then at some point you're going to have to give him another shot. I believe this is 4 wins in a row. In not the deepest division in the UFC, but certainly a fairly top heavy division.
Yeah,
So we'll see what happens. I don't know what they're going to do with him. He didn't take a ton of punishment, it doesn't seem, but he also went for, he fought for 21 minutes or so. So obviously there's wear and tear involved in that. But big win for him. Anthony Smith's going to take some time to recover from this. I always say there's, we talked about it. I think with Ferguson, and I think this is the same kind of situation. Uh, you got to bounce back, but um, how they bounce back is different for all these fighters. And uh, I mean, Smith has 15 career losses, so I'm sure this isn't the first time he's taken a loss where he was on the wrong end of a pretty good beating. But uh, you know, he's got 48 career fights now. It's got to start to catch up at some point, and he's a good dude. So I hope his team in his corner, although can't maybe publicly say it, does a job of protecting him right now, and they don't do something stupid like try to sign him to fight, some other big puncher right now that
yeah.
to try to get him quickly back on the road back. I think he's got to recover here for a little bit and
I
reassess.
mean, what sucks is that he just came back off of the hand injury. He had his hand healing and stuff, and like I said, he came out strong. I thought it was a good outing for him, but I mean, when you listen to the comments after where he was not taking any blame away from the referee or taking blame, blaming the ref or his corner or anything like that, he was putting it all on himself. I mean, that's why they call him Lionheart. So I guess that's where we leave that event. But and then the following Saturday, which was the ESPN UFC on ESPN 8, is that right? It's the eighth one.
Oh, I don't know what I just say it's UFC Fight Night Overeem versus Harris. I don't even know the numbers.
I think it's 8, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Um, yeah, that one. Another crazy night. Like you said, I don't think it. I think Wednesday night was the more wild card, but skipping the first couple fights where we saw a couple early submissions. Uh, the Nate Landwehr and Darren Elkins fight is probably where we start off with our question or our arguably questionable judging, but also extreme violence fight number 3. Um, Landwehr, the one of the a former M1 champion, comes in the UFC,
Mhm.
loses his debut, and then he fights Darren Elkins, who is known for his known for his heart and his determination, and as well as being able to take a beating. Um,
The damage.
you know, he took he took a lot of damage.
Yeah.
He was a bloody mess. I mean, he was as bloody as you've ever seen a fighter in the UFC.
Well,
But
what was funny is that I had done like a live stream thing afterward, and folks that were tuning in later were like, "Where did all that blood come from?" And you just needed to check the Twitter feed for the event and to see that it was
it
from
was
this fight.
Elkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think as the event started off, you figured that would happen. Uh, Elkins was strong round one. I felt he won round one. Round two, he got mauled. That's when a lot of the heavier blood and everything started happening. Round three, he got hit a lot too, but he kept firing back. I don't have a problem with the decision, but if I was judging the fight, I actually would have given it to Elkins. I thought he won the
Hmm.
first round and the third round. I thought the third round he landed the heavier shots. I think this was a clear fight where, while a close fight, I think the deciding factor was just the amount of blood uh, influencing the judges and the
Yeah, the
damage that
damage.
they took.
I mean, you might have a point with that. My question is, do you think any of Nate's antics had anything to do with the judging, with the yelling and the woo and the, hitting himself in the
I
chest, in the face?
I
You know what
don't
I
I
mean?
don't know what the judging.
Because the
I,
judging was weird that night. Is what I'm getting at.
yeah, well, there was a lot of close fights.
Yeah.
Some of the judging was weird as far as some of the scores, but in general,
Hmm.
the fights were real close and competitive. I don't know. I have always said, and I've always lived by the idea that the fans influence the judges based off
Hmm.
of cheering, and I got to throw that out the window now because
There's
it
no
doesn't
fans.
seem to be the
Yeah.
case. Um, but like I said, I would have scored the fight for Elkins. But it was a close enough fight where I don't consider it a robbery at all. I just think that it was, you see stuff different at live events. Both of us have sat close at live events, and you score stuff different. The sounds are different,
Hmm.
and those are events with crowds. Hearing the punches land, I now, when you hear them as loud as they are, maybe that changes the way you judge. Maybe a punch that splits a guy's head wide open, sounds a whole
Hmm.
lot different than a guy just landing a clean overhand right. So uh, we'll have to see how this unfolds. I know a lot of people were disappointed, not so much in that fight. That was one of the less talked about decisions, but a really close fight, one that I somewhat disagreed with. Um, to really kind of get the ball rolling with the judges here. Uh, the Let's see, the next fight of real notice. Kevin Holland picked up a big win over Anthony Hernandez. I think
Oh yeah.
you
But
know
wait, before we get into that, I just wanted to. There was a really cool. The first fight, I believe it was Rodrigo Nascimento when he got his win. Um, he called out the previous event winner and Chase Sherman, right? Because they're heavyweights. Is this the right guy I'm
yeah,
looking at?
yeah,
And I mean, I just thought that was a great call out. They're kind of like at the same level, and you know what I mean. Like I just thought it was I thought it was definitely I wouldn't mind seeing that fight, but yeah, you were talking about Kevin Holland and Anthony Hernandez. That's the guy that Dana White calls Big Mouth. So I was I don't know why. Maybe it's because of that. I picked against him. Like I didn't see him winning, and then he went out and got the win that he got.
yeah. Quick win.
Yeah.
Landed a big knee to the body, and did his thing. He's had some good fights. I mean, when I think of Kelvin Holland, for me, it's the fight he had with Thiago Santos, where
Mhm.
he was kind of a late notice, and uh,
Oh yeah, he did
he
well.
came in
Yeah.
and fought the much bigger, heavier guy, and ended up going to a decision and putting on a good strong performance even in a losing effort. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
Holland's legit, real deal. And I mean, obviously picking up a win in a minute 40 helps, especially in a fight. I believe he may have even been the underdog in this fight. So,
Hmm.
good fight, but that got the ball rolling again. Miguel Baez picks up a knockout win over Matt Brown in a crazy fight. Matt Brown had his moments; they dropped each other. Brown seemed to be leaving his chin open a little bit more than I remember. I mean, I know he's never been afraid to take a shot, but against a young, undefeated fighter, um, it caught up with him, and he eventually took one too many, and the ref was forced to stop the fight.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it was a case of him again. Makes me think of the Smith fight with Teixeira. I don't know if it was the case of him doing too much too early and having it, have an effect later on because that first round it looked like Brown was really taking it to him, and then something happened towards the end where it just changed, and then obviously with the way it turned out, again he'd tell you better than I could, but it was definitely one of those fights that I thought it was going one way until it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think he learned a little bit about Baez there, being able to fight off some
Maniac.
stuff not going his way. I mean, coming
Yeah.
in at 8-0, probably had a pretty easy, probably had it pretty easy going getting to that record. Usually, uh, early in your career, you're not fighting the toughest guys in the world to make it to where to get to that record. But he proved that he's worthy of an undefeated record, and with with the issues that Matt Brown gave him, he was able to fight through it and uh, showed a good chin and you know able to keep his wherewithal and pull it out. So that
Yeah.
was big. Next fight was one that got fans chattering on Twitter about decisions and judges. Yadong Song picked up the win, moves to 16-4 in a decision win over Marlon Vera, who fell to 17-6. Vera was on a huge run coming in. Song still undefeated in the UFC. Um, this was one where again, uh, close fight.
Yeah.
I didn't I don't, a lot of people are screaming. Vera specifically is on social media making a huge stink about it. I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a close fight that
Hmm.
um, I have no problem with how the judges who got the win. I think it was one where. A lot of these fights, I wish we'd get draws. I just feel like that's what a draw is for. Um, in a fight that's so close where half of the world's going, "Hey, you got robbed," the other half's going, "No, it's the right call." I wish we would see more draws in these situations, but I can't complain
I mean,
about it.
the thing
You
is,
know,
I mean, yeah, you could look at at what's supposed to be judged, but it's still the perception of an individual, and when you have more than one individual seeing things not this differently or not the same way, um, that's when you get things like that happen. I watched that fight twice actually because I recorded them since it was on regular TV, old man TV, and I was like, so I rewatched it on Sunday, and because I was like, so like, because I was trying to see, watching Vera, like you said, he's vocal on social, but then I was kind of like, okay, if you when you watch it again, there are points maybe around the second and third round, where Yadong Song Yadong. I don't mean to laugh when I say his name, but I was laughing on Saturday when I was saying it. Um, it just seems like there was points where he was. I mean, he was doing it to be evasive and not take damage, but we've seen in the past when fighters move backward, it scores against them. So I'm wondering if that had anything to do with Vera's argument and the folks that think that he won or see the argument. You know what I mean? So I mean that's just my opinion, but like I said, I watched it twice because I definitely have an interest in song. And yeah, I'm definitely just I feel like we're gonna see more of him in these types of like either he's gonna get these great finishes or fight of the night type of situations.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like it was just a close fight where whoever the
Yeah.
losing side is going to have issues with it. And Vera was just more a little bit more vocal than some of your average fighters. Christoph Jutko picked up a win over Eric Anders. Another fight where Jutko keeps moving up the ranks. It's a few wins
Hmm.
in a row now. Eric Anders, in a sense, continues to kind of disappoint. It feels like there's so much more potential there. I feel like he needs to kind of really turn it up and uh,
Do you
kind of.
think it's a weight issue, like of where he fights? Like is he too big to be heavier, or is this too much for him to be active and be at this weight class because of how whatever he walks around at? That's just kind of an observation I've noticed in his last few fights.
No, I just think he kind of has a grinding style, and I think
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily win the judges over. Um, and it's another close decision, but I think that I feel like at this point he kind of needs to just drop his chin and try to use his athleticism to put some fools on their asses. Otherwise, I feel like he's gonna look back and you're just gonna go, man, there was a lot of opportunity, but you chose to kind of grind a dude up against the cage
Hmm.
as opposed to step back and just kind of go for it. And it's easier for me to say. I'm not the one who has to worry about a counter strike, but um, yeah, I just feel like that he's starting to wind down a little bit here, and I'm wondering how many more opportunities he's going to get because some of his fights haven't been extremely exciting, but you just feel like the explosiveness is there, and um, one of these days he's really going to have to kind of just reach in and go for that. I feel like if he's going to advance much more in his career.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I don't know. I'm just wondering if it's a cardio issue or a weight issue or maybe a combination of the both. That, like you said, we saw him coming up for a little bit, and then now he's having these odd fights. I don't want to say he's fighting bad because these guys put a lot into their craft as martial artists, but that's that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean he had won two fights in a row coming into this one. But I know the fight before I feel like was a questionable. He won a split decision. I feel like it was a questionable fight, one where I didn't think he necessarily won. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. He's going to get another opportunity, but I feel like he's going to have to change some things if he's going to really ever become a contender at no matter what weight class he tries to compete at. The next fight on the card, Dan Ige, Edson Barboza. This was the one fight that I totally disagreed with the judges. I know it was a close fight. I've heard people reason why they thought each fighter won. Um, I just watched the fight and I, I I was somewhat shocked. I thought Barboza actually I thought he won. In a 3 round fight, 10-9 scoring. It's not always
Mhm.
that cut and dry, but I felt like as somebody watching a fight, I watched one man beat up the other man and lose a decision.
It was a great fight too. Yeah, it was a great. It was. I agree, man. It was a great fight, but I mean, if we're gonna obviously with the co-main event talking about weird judging, I mean that was I don't know, man. I mean, maybe we'd have to find out. I'm sure it's somewhere, like maybe at MMA judging or one of those sites where we could see who the judges were, or maybe if were they burnt out from doing 3 events in a row that they just were start like toss flipping quarters on the side of the cage.
Well, like, see, I didn't disagree with the next decision, the Claudia Gadelia,
Hmm.
Angela Hill. I mean, obviously, I'm a Gedalia fan. I always have been, so I was rooting for her. So there was a bias somewhat there, but she won the striking numbers. I mean, she landed more power shots, she threw
Yeah.
more punches, she got takedown. I mean, the numbers were on her side. She clearly won the first round, clearly lost the second round. Third round was very very close. I just felt like she landed the bigger shots. Um, I'm a fan of Angela Hill also. I mean, I actually thought that she was fighter of the year a couple years back when she made her run in Invicta and defended her belt. I mean, she went like 4-0 in a year and knocked everybody out, and then beat Souza in a crazy fight to get the championship. So I mean, I've been a fan of both these ladies, but I don't. I mean, truth be told, I could have lived with a draw again. I feel like some of
Mhm.
these fights just somebody doesn't necessarily deserve to win and somebody doesn't necessarily deserve to lose. They both fought well. I think the blood and the cut, Gadelia, much like Elkins, bleeds in her fights. She always
Mhm.
has, she always will, and I feel like that uh, influences people's things, and it should. There is a point when damage should be accounted for, but I feel like it was just a matter of a couple punches in the second round that did that damage, and then you kind of live with it for the next round. And maybe a fighter is kind of given a little bit more credit when she throws a punch and there's some blood splattering, but it's just from a cut from a strike that happened 8 minutes earlier in the fight, and it wasn't necessarily a crazy punch. I mean, Hill's not necessarily known for her power. She uses her speed and her technique to kind of pick her shots and do her damage. I just didn't have a problem with the decision. And Hill's another one that got real loud on social media, so I feel like uh, that's where it's kind of being polarized and it kind of being blown up a little bit. Um, but I don't think either lady lost any ground in the fight. Um,
No, it was definitely a tough fight, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe I was leaning towards Angela Hill, and not for nothing. I'm also, being a jiu-jitsu guy. Of course, I'm a fan of Claudia Gadella. She actually's got. I think she's got a gym out here in South Jersey. So she's definitely got love from me. But if when she got dropped, I kind of saw the fight going Hill's way a little bit. But the thing is, you know what? I don't know why this is my fault actually. Because was it? I think it was at 249 that they weren't able to get us the numbers for significant strikes and stuff like that because of obviously there were half capacity operational for the events and the way that they were doing them, and I guess they had those for the later events. So maybe I stopped when I heard that the first time. I wasn't paying attention to it, but then I remember the screen coming up, obviously with this event. Now that you mention it, and I kind of just in my own mind, I kind of just didn't pay attention. So that's my fault, but for not looking at that for the math. But you're probably right about that. But
I saw it on Twitter a day or two later,
mm,
and I was just judging it. I just felt like although Angela Hill was
mm,
putting it on Gadelia, I just felt like
mhm,
when Gadelia would counter strike, I felt like her strikes were more powerful. I honestly think she won the fight like in the last 45 seconds of the fight. She landed
mm,
a couple shots that kind of staggered Hill a little bit, or at least slowed her down from coming forward. And I feel like that's kind of what changed it. But again, I feel like it would have been a perfect fight for a draw, and heck, if they went
mhm,
in a rematch, would have been an easy one just to move on and go, hey, let's just do an instant rematch, um, and go like that. But like I said, I don't think the stock of either of them really dropped that much here. Hill was still a ways away. I imagine she'll still get a good fight out of this, and I mean she's improving as a fighter even with the loss on her record. So and Gadelia is kind of at a point where it's kind of win or start thinking almost retirement in a sense
mhm.
because you're only going to climb that mountain so many times before you can't climb it anymore. So that was that. But then the main event, I mean, fireworks.
Yeah.
Between the two, we picked the four fights of the Wednesday and the co in the main event. I ended up going 4-0, so I wish I had done a parlay. I picked Overeem, you picked Harris. Early on, it looked
I
like
was almost right. Yeah.
you had it. And this is another
Yeah.
fight where I feel like the glass chin thing. Uh, if you have a glass chin, you don't survive
Mhm,
the punches that Walt Harris was landing on Overeem. He hit him hard, dropped him, beat up on him on the ground for a while, but Overeem used his. I mean, I would argue that he used his ability as a better overall mixed martial artist and somebody who really has a good ground game that just generally hasn't had to use it much in his career as a heavyweight with his striking prowess. But he was able to survive the initial barrage from Harris. Uh, work him down and get on top. And once he was on top, he was able to do a lot of damage for the second half of the first round. Really control Harris. Harris was a fish out of water on the ground. It felt like he was kind of one of those old school fighters that just is a big striker and has trouble on the ground, especially at their size, moving, especially when you end up on your stomach with a guy like Overeem on your back. And I think a lot of that goes to Overeem's ability to grapple. I mean, he's done well in some of the ADCC and stuff, and he did it earlier in
Mhm.
his career, and he's got submission wins over several good fighters. So um, I just think he like I said, he was able to survive and show that he's as well rounded of a mixed martial arts heavyweight, really as we've ever seen. I mean,
Mhm.
he doesn't have that UFC title, um, but he does have world titles in every other organization he's basically ever fought in. Um, I'd like to see him get it like Glover. I'd like to see some of these old guys before they fade off get one more shot at something. And I don't know if he can beat some of the other guys because he does take shots and a better, more
He's taking
well-rounded
some bad
fighter.
ones. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean
Overeem's taking some bad.
he's
When you look at that when he got knocked out by Francis Ngannou, who I know is trending on the socials these days because he wants to fight John Jones, but I'm just kind of like, oosh, like
no
some of his losses are very bad.
no, that's the life of a heavyweight striker. I mean,
Yeah,
he doesn't have that. He never got that fear. A lot of guys when I mean, he's been knocked out, a lot of times in his career between kickboxing and 60 plus MMA fights, which I think is just natural when you fight that many times and you're a heavyweight puncher. But like in a rematch with Ngannou, I mean, if he uses, I feel like it's one of those situations where if he somehow is able to get a clinch and get Ngannou down to the ground, I feel like that, we saw what Stipe did on the ground, and I know Stipe is a better wrestler than Overeem, but I'm not so sure that Stipe is a better grappler than Overeem. If Overeem got uh, Ngannou down on the ground, I have no reason to believe that he couldn't potentially submit him or beat him up enough where Ngannou's going to have a hell of a time trying to get back to his corner and come out for another round. So, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, he's like I say, he's a complete martial artist, complete fighter, but he does take shots.
hmm
I don't see him beating somebody like Stipe. I don't see him beating somebody like Cormier because their wrestling would neutralize a lot of that, and those guys are still pretty precise with their strikes. Um, Ngannou, I feel like he's one of those guys where if you avoid that massive shot, um, he's beatable, but he could end up proving me wrong if he gets better with his ground stuff. But obviously, all the backstory between Walt Harris, it kind of made anybody, no matter who you're, if you're rooting for, I was rooting for Overeem, but at the same time, it made it a little tough because it would have been a hell of a story to see Walt Harris get that win and the joy it probably would have brought him and his family and stuff. But I think the UFC is going to take care of him. I think he'll still get another big fight. Um, and he's going to hurt some people. I mean, he's gonna beat a lot of people, but um, it just wasn't. You talk about him. He was a little bit out of shape. You talk about this COVID thing. He's obviously got the COVID thing on top of some of the worst things that any human would ever have to deal with in life. On top of that, so I'd like to see him get a full camp of being you know, get it back in shape, shed that, what he coming at like 265 or something. I mean, he's
yeah,
probably a better fighter at like 240, 242, something like that. Lose some of that gut, get his speed, get his bounce back. And I think he still beats a lot of the heavyweights. I just don't know if he beats the top, 5, 6, 7 of the division.
yeah, and like we know with fighters and the way mixed martial arts evolved, maybe that's the case now. But through changes in camp or camp changes or you know what I mean, training methods. Obviously, like with everything going on, not everyone has access to what they're normally have access to. So that's probably the case now, but it won't always be the case. Could get better, could get worse. I mean, like as we know in combat sports, anything can happen. And before, I mean, we got like 10 minutes left here before we close out. Uh, I know I sent you the article, and some more news came of it. Um, we've been kind of hinting at it, maybe for like a whole year, maybe most of 2019, with what's going on with the zone and the way Bellator handles it, or they handle Bellator, I should say. But I mean, I feel like we should talk about it because we've talked about it enough. We've talked about streaming services enough on here. now we're starting to catch wind that they could be parting ways because of the Viacom CBS merger and the connection with Showtime. The article I sent to you was from Boxing Scene, the whole thing with Steven Espinoza, who's a Showtime boxing. People probably know, MMA fans will know him from the whole thing with Mayweather and McGregor, but he actually said he'd be interested in doing crossover boxing and MMA events with Bellator. He said he'd like to do that with Scott Coker once the zone deal expires. And then yesterday, it was reported that the zone wants to expand on combat sports coverage if they don't continue with Bellator. And what they were looking at was bare knuckle boxing. So I know you and I have a lot of takes when it comes to this stuff, but I mean, what is your take on this? The My take is the zone has shown more love to boxing than mixed martial arts as a whole, and the way they market it and things like that. I mean, I feel like they don't put as much energy in Bellator, and they had Combate Americas there for a little while. They got KSW there, Top FC I think is there, and no one really knows about it because they don't promote it the way they promote all the boxing. So, what do you think?
Well, I think that uh, there's less outlets for boxing. So I think that that's more of a natural fit for a streaming service
Hmm.
for boxing fans. MMA, I mean, if you're just a casual MMA fan, you really can just watch the UFC and probably get your fill if you're an average person. That combined with just, the event you would get on Paramount for Bellator. I mean, there was plenty of stuff. So not so much in boxing. So I think that natural fit. I think DAZN also. Um, I mean, they got Canelo, they got Joshua, they got two of the top five names in all of boxing under their banners. So I think that makes it a lot easier for them to promote boxing when you have names like that.
Yeah,
Bellator is obviously is the number two organization in the United States, but I just don't feel like you were going to get. I don't know how many subscriptions you get to Bellator on DAZN for once they changed the price. It made me change my way. I mean, I go to a lot of Bellator events, so it got to a point where I was like, why am I going to pay $100 to watch the three DAZN events that I don't go to? I mean, I might as well
hmm
be spending $35 pay per view at that point. Um, so I think that would I think that was not a good move. I think the 9.99 a month or whatever straight up would have probably been a stronger thing to keep. But when you're signing guys, like I said, to Canelo and Joshua to these multi-$100 million deals, uh, you're going to have to make up money somewhere. I don't know. I'd like to see you. I tell you, I'd just like to see Bellator on CBS. I think that there's still a big market for Bellator. I
yeah,
think they've got the stars. I think if Espinoza uses his brain and Coker and him can come to a deal where they can do kind of what the Elite XC World did and
yeah.
what Strikeforce did for a while. I mean, Strikeforce was cursed by that stupid brawl with Mayhem and the Diaz brothers. That really kind of put the nail in the coffin for them being on CBS at the time. But I still feel like if you put Fedor, if you and then you get guys like Aaron Pico and Antonio and AJ McKee
Well, yeah. I mean,
and all
Bellator
their
cards
youngsters.
are, yeah, exactly. They're young fighters. I mean, people always talk about, oh, Bellator is where the old fighters they go to, close out their career. But I mean, you really have to be a longtime fan or a hardcore fan of MMA and a real hardcore fan of Bellator to see the Patrick Mixes and the AJ McKees and like you said, Aaron Pico and all the guys that are I mean, we've had a lot of their fighters on this podcast that are younger and up and coming. Chris Lencioni, I've interviewed for Sure Dog. We've had his teammate Jake Smith on here, who just came back to fight, and he competed at Submission Underground just recently. So I think if they do start working more with because they already have the CBS Sports thing for the old fights that MMA Recharged. Have you seen that? I don't know if you know that
Yeah,
started.
yeah, no, they're doing that kind of stuff. I just
Yeah.
feel like that there's the UFC or the UFC has a huge market share on stuff, especially with being essentially owned now by ESPN. So
Hmm.
ESPN can really ignore Bellator when Bellator is on Paramount. Can ignore Bellator when Bellator is on DAZN. If Bellator, let's say, the Masters tournament for golf starts in later this year, like in November. Let's say they do something to make up because it normally is in April. Now we do it in November, and all of a sudden, November on a Saturday, they have round three of the Masters, and as the Masters tournament is ending, there's a Bellator event on CBS. I don't think that that's something that ESPN can ignore. All of a sudden, you're on one of the biggest platforms worldwide, and I feel like at that point, you start to have to get talked about on the sports radio talk shows.
Hmm.
Um, Highlights have to start to be shown because at that point, if they don't, then ESPN and Fox Sports News or whatever is still out there. They're really neglecting things happening in the sports world that millions and millions of people are watching, not just 400, 500,000 on Paramount. On a cable channel. So I feel like that's really the breakthrough that you get because I mean I remember the ESPN radio talking about Strike Force, talking about Elite XC. Obviously, Kimbo and some of those guys, fed into that because those guys were almost crossover stars in spite of never really crossing over into anything. Just they were just known basically from YouTube and such. But um, I feel like that's the move is somehow get it where you can feed off of other mainstream big sports, and if you can follow that up with a Bellator event on like a Saturday night, like I said, after the Masters or after a uh, I don't know. I don't know what else CBS really carries for their sports package. Maybe a college football game or something, and then all of a sudden you feed into, you get Alabama, Florida football game, and that feeds into a Bellator event on a Saturday night or something. It just seems to me like that's a win-win situation, and
Yeah.
uh, what Bellator really needs if they're going to try to make the next step and make the deal with CBS really really pay off.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, you brought up Elite XC. I mean, if you look at the days when Strike Force was on Showtime, things like that, those were not bad times. I mean, it was just weird. It was weird when they ended, and I think it was missed when it was gone. So there's definitely some sense of nostalgia brewing in the air too that I think can bring back a lot of older fans. So, yeah, man. I mean, I just wanted. I know we had kind of messaged each other about it during these last few fights in Jacksonville. So I thought it bared mentioning on here because it's definitely something we've been watching since the zone, and Bellator had started their relationship.
No, it's going to definitely be a big move. I mean, however it unfolds, whether DAZN keeps them and cashes that or brings in a bunch of money and somehow, I mean, I don't know how necessarily it would unfold, but the eventually we're going to see Bellator probably on strike or on a Showtime, and hopefully they're able to work it into CBS because I think Showtime still keeps you away from a large portion of the viewing audience, but.
Mhm.
Next week we'll be able to get a preview show. It looks like we're going to get Woodley Gilbert Burns on the 30th. And then it looks like UFC is racking up events lining up for every weekend in
June,
June.
yeah.
So that looks like it'll be exciting.
June
So
might be Fight Island month, right?
yeah, who knows? I just hope that they get settled somewhere and don't move. I don't understand why they even left Florida, to be honest. But Nevada's opening stuff up a little bit, so they're kind of back home. It's more of a regionalized area for them to be able to
Yeah,
bring people in. I
yeah,
think.
yeah. I think the Apex. I mean, you have the Apex. You talked so much about it when it was built. Well, if you once you can be home, do it from home until we can get back to normal. But I mean, I think it'll be dope too in the Apex. It's supposed to be this technological media marvel for fights. Then it's time to see what you got, right?
I'm down for it. Let's see where we get. But until we talk next week, fans can follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, at Carbeerzol on Instagram. And for those of you that cannot get enough of Ed Carbajal, he now has a Twitter or a Twitch. A Twitch station, old head carb. Uh, so if you want to watch him play some video games and I imagine do some online chatting, old head
Yeah,
carb on Twitch.
yeah. I'm playing the Division 2. which is about getting the country back together after a pandemic. So
Oh, there it is. Tune in, folks. If you, like I said, you can't get enough of Ed here. So, uh, all right, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and look forward to previewing Woodley versus Burns next week.
yes, sir.